Now we turn our attention tonight to the drop in vaccination rates in this country and what we can or should do about it. The uptake for the standard childhood vaccines against meningitis, tetanus, diphtheria and whooping cough fell last year. The uptake for the HPV vaccine against cervical cancer remains disappointing at 62%, and the flu vaccine uptake was also low. So why is this happening? What should be done for the common good? And should the state force children to be vaccinated? This report from Conor Wilson.
The recent confirmed cases of measles in counties Limerick and Dublin are just the latest in a series of outbreaks of the disease around the country in the last year. Measles can be deadly, but is entirely preventable. It is also one of several diseases for which vaccination rates have dropped in Ireland.
On the basis of pseudoscience, nonsense, out-and-out lies and conspiracy theories, we are seeing people dropping their commitment to vaccination across society. They're deciding it's too dangerous, even though it's perfectly safe for the overwhelming majority of patients. So yet you now have a situation where diseases that were more or less eradicated from Irish society are starting to come back in.
National uptake for several major childhood vaccinations has fallen in recent years, something which the HSE attributes to falsehoods and misinformation spread by the so-called anti-vax movement. Uptake of the meningitis vaccine fell by 3% to 83.9% last year. There was a similar drop in uptake for the vaccine against diphtheria, tetanus and whooping cough, which fell 3% to 85.5%. And uptake of the MMR vaccine against measles, mumps and rubella has also dropped slightly to 92%. All of these are below the benchmark of 95% uptake for herd immunity. While the vast majority of children starting school have already been vaccinated, it has been suggested that if parents can't be convinced to vaccinate, they should be compelled. Every child in shared childcare and in all public and private schools should be subject to mandatory vaccination. That's according to Workers' Party councillor Ailish Ryan.
I believe what she's proposing has been done in some countries to an extent in that children have to produce a certificate to get into certain schools. I think it's a good idea. Maybe it's the way forward. However, I think the approach of the Australians is the optimum one and has been shown to work, and that is linking it to social welfare payments. It's called no job, no pay. A reduction in child benefit for those who refuse to vaccinate their kids. This has worked in Australia. It can work in Ireland.
But how might these proposals be received by parents?
So I think everybody should be on the same page rather than, because it's not fair some children getting vaccinated and then others coming in and maybe catching it and then spreading it to everybody else, you know.
I haven't gotten her vaccinated now and she's 12 weeks, but I'll decide when she's a little bit older and see how she gets on. But if it does affect her school, like if they don't let her into school, I'll just have to battle it then and come to it then when it happens, but I really don't think it's fair.
Like it's something I agree with. I think all children should have the vaccinations before to go to school.
There's too much at stake here. So if you don't vaccinate your own kids, it's not just about you and your children and your sense of entitlement. It is also about others out there who will be affected in an outbreak and who could die in an outbreak. They might not be your kids, but they're someone's kids, and they have to be protected. And worse still, new vaccines, like the HPV vaccine for cervical cancer, are being undermined, and it's going to cost lives in the years ahead.
The doubt sown by anti-vaxxers in the minds of some parents meant that take-up rate of the HPV vaccine dropped as low as 50% among teenage girls. And while that has risen, it's still a long way off its target. That same doubt may also exist among some of Ireland's healthcare workers. Less than half of them availed of the flu vaccine this winter, prompting Health Minister Simon Harris to say that he would consider making the jab obligatory. But whether it's through school access or social welfare payments, the HSE told Primetime that it does not see the need for compulsory immunisation for children at the moment.
Conor Wilson reporting there. Now joined by Ailish Ryan, who Conor mentioned there, Workers' Party councillor in Dublin's North Inner City, and by Michael Fitzmaurice TD in Galway, Roscommon Independent. Ailish, tell us about your proposal, which would be for a mandatory scheme, really.
Well, I think the major thing to say around our scheme is that it's very much in reaction to what is rightly considered an emergency situation. So the fact that vaccines have been dropping by 3% per year means that we're now down in the 80s in the major contagious diseases vaccination rates. And the WHO would say that when you get below about 90%, people within the population, like infants below the age of 6 months, like people who can't be vaccinated for medical reasons, they lose the immunity that high rates of immunity tend to provide to people. So this scheme would be rolled out specifically for vaccinations relating to contagious diseases. So it would just be things like MMR, like diphtheria and tetanus, the ones that are already scheduled and that 90% of the population already avail of. And really you'd be talking about it targeting a very small number of people who are opting out.
I'm basically saying that the children would be vaccinated whatever the parents wanted.
If the parents wished for their children to go to collective organisations like schools, they would have to be vaccinated. I think that mainly what you're saying there is that as a society we have a responsibility to ensure that schools are safe places to send children, and when high numbers of people start to opt out of vaccinations, or even small numbers of people, it means that school becomes an unsafe place for other children.
Michael Fitzmaurice, what did you say to that? And we even heard Rory Haney there saying, like, for instance, schemes like in Australia, no jab, no pay, they work.
First of all, I think the proposal is basically putting us into a nanny state. I think we're underestimating parents. Every parent, Miriam, wants what's good for their child. I think the way you can target this and the way forward is making sure that you educate people about it. And in fairness, most vaccines, all vaccines have done good, but there's a minority of people, unfortunately, no more than some people can take penicillin and some cannot, that may have an adverse effect on them. And I think that needs to be tackled head on, to take where you get doubt about something. The likes of the HSE needs to make sure that it listens to those people and learns from it, because only working together will bring things forward. And people have come out in the media and criticised politicians and said this was parish pump for even asking a question in the likes of the Dáil. It is our duty, if there is somebody that has a concern as a public representative, to ask the Minister the question in place.
Yeah, I think there's just two things. The first thing around the idea of being a nanny state, like we're a democratic society, people have the freedom to choose what they want to do until they start making choices that put other people at risk. And this is a clear instance where that's the case. So it's absolutely true that not everybody is able to tolerate vaccinations. And the HSEs does a really good job of assessing who those people are. And it's exactly for those people that we need to ensure that anybody who can be vaccinated is. Actually, some of the leading people campaigning for a higher uptake in vaccinations and campaigning against vaccination myths are the parents of children who can't be vaccinated, and also the parents of infants. I have a large number of friends living in North Dublin who have children under the age of 6 months at the moment, and they're not vaccinated, and they're terrified to go outside the door because they're terrified that their young infant will contract measles, which is a fatal disease. For a baby to die of a preventable disease in Ireland, I think is wrong.
But we need to allay the fears of those parents who do not want to vaccine for whatever reason they're not going for it. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, Miriam, I think that we need, as I said earlier, both in schools, through the media, we need to make sure that we, explain all of this to people. We need to be at prime time sort of times to make sure that it gets the audience that it needs. But we also need to make sure that whatever research, there's no point saying to somebody, oh, you're not affected. You might be only 1% or 0.1 of 1%, but you need to take that person and work with them, not basically close the door. I'll give you an example. The 3-in-1, I think in the 60s, I don't remember it, I wasn't born, but the 3-in-1 in the 60s, I looked at a case this evening, and finally, there was two parts of it very good, I understand, and one part of it that was problematic. And most people had no reaction. It was, I think, one batch that was problematic. And somebody raised the concern, they were basically hammered for it, and 19 years later, they were justified. But what the state needs to do is work with the people.
Let me come back in there for one moment, Michael, from Fitzmaurice, just to say, but at the end of the day, you heard Rory Haney there. It is dangerous for people not to vaccinate. And there is, I suppose, a question of the common good, because vulnerable small children could suffer.
Well,
The vaccinations that we're talking about are ones that are decades old, so they are the likes of the MMR. Actually, the best placed people to spot when these vaccinations are having negative effects is the HSE. They've done a really good job of it, and absolutely, when there are genuine concerns, they should be addressed and they shouldn't be ignored. And we do have a history of doing that in this country. I think the best way to ensure that vaccinations are safe is for them to be under the control and for research to be funded by the state and not by corporations. The HSE has managed to almost eradicate things like measles, rubella, things like polio, which there are people still suffering the consequences of at the moment. And I think that and in relation to education also, the HSE has done an excellent job. It's already doing an excellent job. Unfortunately, they're not the only source of information anymore, and something more extensive is necessary, because 3% a year drop is just...
Miriam, we live in a democracy. It's not communism in this country. People, I believe, if there is enough of a media focus on it, I think people will go for the best option for their child. We have to respect parents. We have to respect their intelligence. And basically, using the big bad stick isn't the solution. And definitely, to families that are in need of the children's allowance or whatever, using that, I don't think is a way forward. It won't solve the child's problem that way.
I think that we need to respect the wishes of the parents we heard on the programme today, that they send their children to school in a safe environment. And unfortunately, that doesn't go along with parents having the right not to vaccinate their children.
OK, Ailish Ryan, Michael Fitzmaurice, thank you both very much for chatting to us tonight.